we're in 1 Samuel chapter 16. We've kind of gone through the story of Saul by himself, and we're seeing the kind of advent of David now onto the scene coming forward here. There's a bunch of like storylines that are kind of happening and kind of things that rhyme with the past and everything that's going on there. You have Eli, who's kind of like one of these last judges, but it kind of seems like he doesn't quite know what's going on. Samuel seems to be pretty wise, but even he kind of misses some things. We see the big part, and this is establishing theology in Judaism, is that when God said it was that they wanted a king, that it was kind of a rejection of him type of thing. So we're kind of going into that realm that my version, you guys have all heard this before, but my view of the Babylonian captivity and all of that stuff is really God's like, well, if you just want to be like these other nations so bad, if you want to be Babylon so bad, if you want to be Assyria so bad, if you want to be big and important, you can just be them then. And that's when they're kind of taken captive and all that stuff. I really like that view of it, because it kind of is like, oh, like, you know, it's not like they're being punished. It's like they're getting what they're asking for, you know, like that's, I don't really enjoy the punishment narrative too much. I think the punishment narrative in the Bible, when we look at it that way, that it often then gives us the license to beat ourselves up a little too much. We're like, oh, I should be punished by God or something like that. Or it gives us the license to beat other people up more than we should. And then you don't see that punishment narrative happen in Jesus. Like you don't see that. Sometimes you see people try to make it that where God is punishing Jesus for on behalf of us. I don't think that's what's going on. It's much more part of the sacrificial system. And so that's why I kind of view it that way. It's this all encompassing idea of watching, of being vigilant about what's going on around us. So there's your New Year's little devotion right there, right? So it's but yeah. So we're in chapter 16. We start seeing David in here, and you're going to see as we read through some of this that a lot of the themes of Judaism coming out, like the idea of shepherds and humbleness and all that stuff. And the thing that we need to remember is what was going on when Saul was being anointed king and being found out to be king. And I think it's important to go back and forth on that. So yeah. I
have a question.
Yeah.
When did the promise that Jesus would be born out of the line of Judah? When was that?
I think that's pretty much all like Isaiah stuff.
Okay, so after this.
Yeah.
Okay. Because Saul was Benjamin.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't say that unequivocally right now. I know Isaiah does a lot of that lifting. Those are often things that get read on Christmas Eve and all that. I can't think of really anywhere else. There may be some stuff that's kind of written somewhere else, but nothing's coming.
So they're not like saying, "Oh yeah, we know we're gonna."
No.
That's at this point.
No. I don't think so.
Genesis talk about the serpent and the on the ground and being bitten on.
Yeah. On the heel, like you have that, but it's not like that's not connecting to the tribes. But that is an idea, and about this kind of that part of that the curse narrative that there's kind of that hopefulness, kind of the sting of or the serpent side of the curse will be kind of overcome and stuff like that. And that's kind of a hopeful part of that narrative that's kind of coming in there. And as Christians, we view that as part of what Jesus is doing for us. You know, the Christian movement really took that verse and really like, here it is. Here, like that's right there. So All right. Was there anything else?
The only thing that bothers me is this next reading that we're going to says that God put an evil spirit in Saul.
Okay, we'll talk about that.
I don't understand that.
I think, again, I'm not as well prepared for it as this. This is all stuff we know pretty well. But I think it's good to probably, we'll see what the wording sounds like when we get to it. But it kind of remembering what it's like with Pharaoh, and
Hardened his heart.
Like hardened his heart, and like what does all that mean? And I think you'll probably see a lot of rhyming with that Pharaoh story, and with what is going on with Saul. Like that's because we also have to remember that God's disappointed in Saul, but he's still king, during all these things. And so like there's still like God's anointed type of idea going on there.
It just seemed like David had more compassion for Saul than God did. So I couldn't quite get that.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll get into that. We'll get into that because those are good questions. And like what is the idea that's trying to be communicated through this as we go forward here. And so yeah. But I have a feeling that Pharaoh narrative is going to be where some of these answers are. And I think we're also going to see where there's multiple times where Saul could have gotten off of the tirade that he's on, and he just refuses. Yeah, right. Like he just kind of continues on. And as you can see and I think what the story is telling us about Saul is that he's not really doing any of these things for God. He's doing all these things for himself, like the sacrifices that he's doing. He's trying to get God onto his side. Like that's
an example of the lean not into your own understanding.
Yeah, that there's that stuff. And you end up seeing that this is just what Israel does over and over and over again. Like that is a huge part of what Israel does all throughout.
Can you hear me?
I mentioned Ed.
Yes.
No, they can't even. They're not even listening.
No. I can hear.
Hi, mention Ed.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello. We're here. Yeah. All right. So let's go in. I'm not sure how far we'll read. Maybe we'll read all of 16. It's not terribly long, and so we'll see what's going on here. So let's make sure you guys on the Zooms make sure that everything is running okay. So we'll share the screen. Oh, which screen is it? It's this one. And we need to share sound, optimize for video, share. And then here we go.
Wow.
And here we go. Chapter 16, verse 1.
Now the Lord said to Samuel,
How long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons.
How can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me.
Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Then invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. You shall anoint for me the one I name to you.
So Samuel did what the Lord said, and went to Bethlehem. And the elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said,
Do you come peaceably? Peaceably. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice.
Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons, and invited them to the sacrifice. So it was, when they came, that he looked at Eliab and said,
Surely the Lord's anointed is before him.
But the Lord said to Samuel,
Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart.
So Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said,
Neither has the Lord chosen this one.
Then Jesse made Shammah pass by. And he said,
Neither has the Lord chosen this one.
Thus Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse,
The Lord has not chosen these. Are all the young men here?
There remains yet the youngest, and there he is, keeping the sheep.
Send and bring him, for we will not sit down till he comes here.
So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, with bright eyes, and good-looking. And the Lord said,
Arise, anoint him, for this is the one.
Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and went to Ramah. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servants said to him,
Surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. Let our master now command your servants, who are before you, to seek out a man who is a skillful player on the harp. And it shall be that he will play it with his hand when the distressing spirit from God is upon you, and you shall be well.
Provide me now a man who can play well, and bring him to me.
Look, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person. And the Lord is with him.
Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said,
Send me your son David, who is with the sheep.
And Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them by his son David to Saul. So David came to Saul and stood before him. And he loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer. Then Saul sent to Jesse,
Please let David stand before me, for he has found favor in my sight.
And so it was, whenever the Spirit from God was upon Saul, that David would take a harp and play it with his hand. Then Saul would become refreshed and well, and the distressing spirit would depart from him.
All right, let's talk about that. Did the sound okay from the computer and all that?
Sounded okay here.
Good. Okay, so let's go over this. So, anything kind of stand out to you here? Like we have Gloria's distressing spirit and all that stuff. We'll talk about that in a little bit. What else kind of stood out to you here?
Pretty convenient that David happened to be there with his lyre.
yeah. Like David can play. And I think we're starting to see some of that. There it is convenient, and it might be a little too convenient. There's probably some work being done to get them there, and things like that. Which there's really nothing wrong with that. But what else? Did anything else stand out to you?
I thought it was interesting that the first son, the oldest son, he rejected, and he said, "Don't look at his looks," because that's what Saul had. He was tall and good looking, and you know.
Like, and that's also you look at Samuel. He saw the first one. He's like, oh, here it is.
Yeah.
And that's another little like chink in Samuel's armor. I think that we're seeing. I have a note from Bible studies past here that it's like Samuel can't see it. like he's still looking at the outward appearance, and that's he can't see it. Now, what's interesting there is when they do see David, there's still some old thinking coming in, and I think this is some theological work being done there. Let's see, what's it, verse 12? So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him. So it kind of all of a sudden, the Lord looks at the heart, but they're like, oh, this guy's pretty good. Yeah. Like that's, and so that's kind of interesting. I do think that the phrase bright eyes is interesting. Is that different in any other translation? Beautiful eyes. Yeah. Like, so.
This is a beautiful countenance.
Beautiful countenance. Yeah. Growing with health. Glowing with. Yeah. So, it's interesting that like Leah, Jacob's first wife, she says that she's got, how does it describe her eyes? I'm blanking on it, but that she has weak eyes. That's what it is. Weak eyes. Which you're like, oh, what does that mean? Like that's, but it kind of makes me think of, did David just look like he kind of had his act together? Like you can see in some people that it's like, oh, like you look like the countenance thing, like you look like you got your act together, and you look at other people and you're like, it's not going all the way to the top, is it? Like you can just kind of tell by looking at, like that's so that's, and I kind of wonder if that's some of what's going on. I don't know. That's just my conjecture completely there. Let's see. Was there anything else that you noticed?
Interesting, verse 11. The shepherd who tends the flock is the one suited to tend the people.
Okay, so let's see. Oh, here he said it. All right, so that's what it says in the Jewish one. So let me see what it says in here.
And interesting, Saul lost his. He couldn't even keep track of his donkey.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so. Yeah, Saul lost the donkeys before, and he wasn't really seeking the power, but he's kind of all of a sudden around where they're kind of choosing all of this, and he's lost the donkeys. Now, David isn't around where they're choosing all of this because he's keeping the sheep. There's definitely some theology and like what kingship looks like in Israel kind of being said about David here. And so
brought up that he slew the lion and the bear.
Yeah.
He's so protective of the sheep.
You got to have a good heart, but you also got to look good.
David having thoughts of going back to Egypt.
Like what do you mean? Like where does it say? Where does it say? Where are you getting that?
Say that it's just David was so separate from the rest of the family, tending the sheep and not hearing all the kibitz.
Oh yeah.
Talking and I wish this and I wish that. He's by himself, so he's not thinking, why are we here? Why aren't we back in Egypt?
Okay. I see what you're saying. Like he's not going after power,
right?
Really at all.
A thought.
Yeah, like I want
great faith in God.
Yeah.
Thing too. When he was going to slay the giant.
Yeah.
He very confident that God would be the one to take care of that situation.
Yeah, just occurred to me.
Yeah. So I'm looking at this. I'm wondering if this Jewish translation is a lot different on this verse 11.
It also says, and shepherd was a common epithet of the king in the ancient Near East, but not just Israel, maybe.
Yeah. So it's about the same. So like that was just a common say that again.
A common epithet to the king in the ancient Near East.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, we're still like you got to go into what knowledge you have of the ages that we're in. We're probably Bronze Age, I think, right now. Where kind of all these things we're moving into where we have more. We're not, in Abraham's time, you're definitely more nomadic, moving around. All these things, these cities are starting to get popular. And now we're moving into, you have more fortified cities, more centralized governance, and all these things. So that would make sense where a shepherd view like that would be.
And it connects him to Moses. Moses is depicted as a shepherd.
Yeah, there when he's in Midian. Yeah. So let's see here. So the things that I noticed were one of them. So let's see here. Let's talk about that famous verse of the Lord does not see as man sees. Everyone else sees on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Huge verse creating. It's also saying a lot about David, and you see David's kingship exists around this, because David in a lot of ways messes up as big or bigger than Saul does. But David keeps turning to the Lord, not to get things from the Lord, but just turns to the Lord to be closer and walk around. Where every time Saul turned to the Lord, it was to like get God back on his side and all those things.
Saul wasn't repetitive at all.
Yeah. And so that was it. He wasn't repentant until he was losing stuff. And so that's kind of where that is. I also think it's interesting. Verse 10, thus Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. Like that 7 number there, remember, it's like emojis, but it's like that was it's almost like saying like Jesse made all of his sons, but it's not all of his sons.
He already thought shepherd was wasn't good enough.
Didn't count.
Yeah. Which when you look back, I mean, this is that's the story of Joseph. That's so many stories in the Bible where the young overlooked, like that's ends up being the big one. So I thought that was a fun little touch. Okay, so let's talk about verse 14. So they kind of anoint David in verse 14, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. All right, let's let me see what
This one says tormented him.
Tormented him, yeah.
Terrifying.
Terrifying him. So the way the Jewish Bible just reads it is, now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord began terrifying him. So, all right, we got to do a little bit of work there. A little bit of work. Go ahead.
There's one in this Bible that the explanation is determined in the contrast courses of their lives, so like the evil spirit from the Lord. And this statement and then similar ones to Scripture indicate that the evil spirits are subject to God's control and operate only with within the divinely determined boundaries. And Saul's disobedience continued to be punished by the assaults of the evil spirit. It's not saying that, to me, it's not that the evil spirit was instilled into Saul, but that Saul's actions were being attacked or whatever by these evil spirits. It was basically, you're going the wrong way, and these are the terrifying spirits coming in to me to let him know this is the wrong way. To me, do you see what I'm trying to say? I don't explain it well.
I think I see what you're saying. Also, you got to think about it's not the cure, but what's something that is making him feel better at the end of the chapter there?
David.
The music, right? The music's making him feel better, and it's calming them. So there's 2 paths that we can both use, and we can keep them both distinct. Like remember, we weren't there. We only have the words that were written about this, but we can make conjectures. But also, I think it's to remember what the text is saying, but also be thinking about like, oh well, this is something of what it could mean. Like we've seen that Saul has been doing like everything. The way I view it, it looks like he's doing all this stuff for himself, and now like he's obviously being rejected and things like that. It's probably not good for anyone's mental health. But if he's so consumed with himself already, and just think about everyone, like what does it say about power and money and wealth? It corrupts and all those things. And if you're watching this, you could be watching like Saul kind of descend into madness. Now it doesn't really say that, but it's kind of there, especially with the music being providing some comfort to him. And like what we know later on in the story, like he just throws spears at David for no reason every now and then. Like has Saul, is this language what they're using back then to describe this ailment that Saul is going through? And we can't forget of what it's saying and where the Spirit of the Lord departed, and that's, you can't forget those words and just explain it away. Like that's not good. That's not how you read all this. But I think it helps us get into that mindset of like, okay, this may be what's going on with Saul, is that he is slipping farther into madness. Oh, I gotta let Lee left. And so like that could be some of what's happening here. And
that's what it says in this one
yeah.
too.
Sorry, Lee, I didn't notice you were gone. and so it's so we have him kind of slipping into madness there, and that could be kind of what we're dealing with here. And so now they bring David into the courts, which is a little sneaky, but it's also smart because they have the guy who they want to be king next, who's obviously the anointed one who is over there. They're kind of getting him in there because Saul's still king.
Yeah.
Like that Saul is still king. So yeah, he's now kind of playing the lawyers in the courts, and that's kind of smart, like kind of getting them around there. And he's
picture and leave you standing.
He's also being
stand on me.
Good one for else. I'm going to mute you guys. I can hear you. So you want to say something?
David's popularity is growing and Saul's is going the other way. And you can almost see him going, wait a minute. But he's the one that welcomed David into the, he brought him in, he wanted him.
Yeah.
Now we see him.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Everybody likes him more than me. You can see where he's tormented by that.
Oh yeah.
In the study Bible, the NIV one, it says this episode with David playing for Saul could have occurred after the defeat of Goliath, but it is placed here to contrast the departure of God's Spirit from Saul with his Spirit upon David. And I wondered that when I read, because after he defeats Goliath, Saul says, well, whose kid is this?
Yeah.
And here he to ask Jesse for him to stay. So it's like I wonder, well, how come he didn't know who David was when he's already contacted Jesse for him?
So it's kind of telling a story to craft a narrative of what's. Yeah.
I don't think he realized how much effect David would have.
Yeah. Yes.
Popularity wise, he really is a lot more than what he expected.
Exactly. You heard the women singing. I don't know.
Yeah,
he killed thousands.
Oh yeah.
David killed the 10,000.
Like that. And you start seeing that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It had to do with where it talked about the Lord putting an evil spirit in him.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing that was the way through the rest of it that wound up having David come and be close to him and turning bad into good.
Yeah. So like that's and I'm not trying to explain this away, but I think it helps seeing that like Saul is obviously not well, and I think there's some, and you can think about how we describe even things today. It's like, oh man, that person just has a distressing spirit about them. Like we still use that same kind of language, and that language is valid, right? Like over there. So it's what I'm trying to encourage is don't dismiss them saying a distressing spirit of the Lord troubled him. But I wouldn't put all of our apple carts on that either. Mm-hmm. Like that's, so it's not, because that's something that we would probably still say today, even though we know someone's going through some mental anguish, like there's a distressing spirit on them. So don't throw it away, because it's definitely there, but also I wouldn't put all of those feelings on it at the same time. I think Saul is just distressed. And so what I don't think we need to do is you need to be careful where God's going to put a distressing spirit in you. That's not what this is saying.
I see it as a step one. He had the problem already before the spirit was put on him.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's trying to say that, God made him into this, made him make these decisions. I think he was making these decisions, and that's why the spirit is on him.
Yeah.
To give him the realization that he's wrong. He's wrong, going the wrong way. But
that's why I like my view of the captivity, where it's like, well, if you just want to be this, you can.
Your decision was made.
Yeah, you can do that. And I think we can see this, like you think about, a relative or a friend that has just angry all the time.
It's so funny. Right now we just had a person that lost a loved one in a horrific way.
Yeah.
And her countenance has changed from, she's very angry, and you're seeing, now we can see what, we have the top, we're allowed to see the troubles, but she can't.
Yeah.
Her blame is going all over the place. And I think that's kind of what you see with him.
Yeah.
They're just
and you're
too close to see it, maybe.
And if you get a couple years away, how would you tell the story? What are the words that you would use?
Yeah,
it probably wouldn't be that far from what's being written here. Huh. So that's exactly. So let's go into David and Goliath. I think we need to just do this whole thing. It's a long chapter. This is probably all we're going to do. I probably haven't given enough time to it even. So there's a lot going on with David and Goliath. A lot of theology. I just did this wrong. All right.
Before you do that, I just thought it crossed my mind that Saul's own narcissism is what led to his mental disorders.
It really goes over the edge.
Yeah.
But that was the first step.
Yeah.
His own cause.
Yeah,
that's all.
Yeah, that's a good encapsulation. I think it's a good encapsulation of what we're talking about.
I'm looking at a Kretzmann commentary.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. It says now that his rejection was an established fact, and an evil spirit from the Lord, which having been given permission to that effect by the Lord, then where it says troubled him, and that talks about the terrifying. And then the servant said, behold, now an evil spirit from God. And after that, the commentary says sent as a punishment from God.
Yeah. And so, and that's a way to look at it. But you can, and what I think we can see that Saul has been driving himself to this point. Yeah. And we're definitely, and we're going to see that further in the David and Goliath.
It's a cause and effect kind of.
Yeah. And there's tons of Jesus theology for Christians with David and Goliath. So we'll see what's going on there. All right, so here we go. 1 Samuel 17.
Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath, from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. And a shield-bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel, and said to them,
"Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together."
When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in years in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to the battle. The names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David occasionally went, and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. Then Jesse said to his son David,
"Take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp, and carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news of them."
Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things, and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. Then, as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines. And he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said,
"Have you seen this man who has come up?
Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel."
Then David spoke to the men who stood by him.
What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?
So shall it be done for the man who kills him.
Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David.
Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle.
What have I done now? Is there not a cause?
Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. Then David said to Saul,
Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine.
You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him. For you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth.
Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine.
Go, and the Lord be with you.
So Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul,
I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them.
So David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand. And he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came, and began drawing near to David. And the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking.
Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?
And the Philistine cursed David by his gods.
Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field.
You come to me with a sword, with a spear and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands.
So it was when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Shaaraim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. When Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army,
Abner, whose son is this youth?
As your soul lives, O king, I do not know.
Inquire whose son this young man is.
Then, as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him,
Whose son are you, young man?
I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite.
All right. Okay, so let's start unpacking this, because there's a lot going on. If I skip over something you think we need to talk about, let me know. I'm running short on time though. So, all right. So they go together. Now there's something. So so Goliath basically makes this stand, like, beat me and you'll be able to, whoever wins like a single combat battle, then that will be a way. Like it's pretty common back then to have battles like that. It's a lot cheaper. And so so that was kind of a way. And Goliath probably had a reputation, as you can kind of see there. One of the things I think is interesting that's said is verse, what is it? It's hard to tell where the 8. Lee, you want to say something?
16. The Philistine stepped forward morning and evening, took his stand for 40 days.
Yeah. That's a big one right there. That's a big one. That's already established, important number, right? And we cannot forget, like that's sitting in there intentionally. You have the flood, you have wilderness wanderings, you got all of those things. So they've been sitting there in this kind of limbo thing, like worried about things that are going to happen, type of thing. So,
Pastor?
Yeah.
The point, my first thought when I saw that was Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And then went out to the people.
Yeah.
Goliath is screaming at Israel for 40 days. And now David is going to come out to the people.
Yeah, and that's a very good like analogy right there, because he's with the sheep, he's with the herds, and we have to start thinking about what was going on with Saul beforehand. Remember, Saul didn't like he's lost the donkeys and all those things. He hasn't shown this. Now David is still, even with all this activity going on, he's still going back and being a good shepherd. And then you start seeing, I don't want to get too far. I wanted to think before this, but part of his rebuttal for why he's good at this is in protecting the sheep, he was able to kill the lions and the bears, so like that's a huge deal. Like he's like, you see David as being the good shepherd, even with the sheep, but he's also doing it with Israel too, because remember, he's already been anointed to be the next king. He's not king yet, but we're seeing that he is stepping up here. One of the things Goliath said in verse 8, I think it is, verse 8, kind of near the end, he goes, "Am I not a Philistine and you are servants of Saul?" That this is something that is a weird little thing to say, and the other translations have it worded like that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's an odd thing to put it in just like King Saul, because we already seen that David has been anointed as the next one. So it's almost like there's some chink into Goliath's armor, and just Israel's in generally too, that like they are these servants of Saul, but
there's the people searching the security of the human king.
Yeah.
Who always,
yeah,
they're still looking for the king to save them, not
yeah.
where David is.
Mm-hmm. So that's, and I think that's a big thing, because Goliath is big, scary, and imposing, and you see David is the exact opposite of all of that. You know, like that's we even see how
Can't wear the armor.
he can't wear the armor. Yeah, he can't do all these things. Now, some of this, and this is kind of political stuff. We don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but we see what David will get for defeating Goliath.
Yeah.
He basically gets king level prizes. Yeah. For being able to. Yeah.
Girl.
Yeah, he gets the girl and like tons of riches and all of that.
Did Saul withdraw the girl in the end?
Yeah. That's not too happy with it, right? Not too happy with it. Let's see here. So again, we go, and this kind of goes back to what Lee was talking about in verse 28, 28 through, I guess, 29, 30, something like that. His oldest brother is like, what are you doing? You know, like, why did you come down? You've just been in the wilderness. So yes, we know Jesus was in the wilderness, but we also know that Israel was in the wilderness, and the flood is its own form of wilderness as they go out into the realm. And he's like, I know your pride and insolence of your heart, you know, and it's almost like David, he says something, it sounds confusing to us, like, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? And it's almost like this forefront of coming in, kind of like what Lee said there. This wilderness talk is happening as they come out of this 40-day period. So again, before we talk about the armor and all of that, you know, Saul is like, you are a youth, you're not good enough to do this over there. But notice that Saul hasn't been courageous at all. Like and everyone is still scared.
I'm trusting God to be with him.
Yeah.
One of the comments in this one also says that fear, they might have been embarrassed because David came in and said, this guy's scaring you?
Yeah.
You know, and it says here, you know, that his brother burns with anger. It has jealousy towards his brother, a sense of guilt for his defeatist attitude towards the Israelite. He's already decided we can't beat him.
Right.
Yeah.
And here comes David and says, this is the guy that's holding it up, you know, kind of attitude.
Yeah. Yeah. So then David says this in verse 45. And there's a distinction, and this is a subtle distinction. This could be just a lot of Chris Escher coming out, so be aware of that. But in verse 45, then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. Now this reminds me of what Goliath said earlier. Am I not a Philistine? Aren't you people of Saul? That it seems like the people of Saul are also wanting to come with spear and javelin and sword. And because it keeps making a big deal out of David not having a sword. And he goes, but I come in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel. And it's almost like it's saying that Goliath is looking at Saul, and he sees that everyone is putting their trust in Saul. But David's actually pointing to the true thing. David's actually pointing to the thing that's going to save him, and it's not that David's ability with all these things but it's that God could make one smooth stone work type of idea. And so, yeah.
47.
Yeah.
Isn't there almost a prophetic, the Lord can give victory without sword or spear?
Yeah.
And my first thought was the cross.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is totally, this is why I said there's a lot of theology being done in the story of David and Goliath, that it's not that the Lord doesn't work through the powers of man and military might. Like that's, the Lord doesn't work through those things. The Lord is working through this anointed David kid who's small and insignificant, and you see the same pattern as Jesus is living in the world and Jesus is going to the cross. You see the same pattern here, where even though all the military might of Rome, which is standing in for Babylon, and Babylon represents all the powers of the world, that God's champion, still without all of that, even if it seems like he's even succumbing to it, is able to prevail in the end. So the Lord does not save with sword or spear. Like that's a big thing. And this is where it should affect our own theology, is that that's why I talk about politics all the time, is that when we get too involved in the politics of men and around in us, we start putting our faith in Saul, to quote here, we start putting our faith in the swords and the spears and all those things. Those are things that we still need to pay attention to, but like that's, and
not the ruler.
The thing that makes me the saddest is that oftentimes the people that are proclaiming the ways of Christianity the most are also the ones that proclaim the glories of military might the most too. And that really distresses me. Like that's because it goes counter to much, to pretty much the whole narrative going forward, all the way to, it was the Christmas sermon, I think, the Christmas Day sermon, where Jesus comes back in these glorious robes and all that. No, it was the one before Christmas. That Jesus comes back in Revelation. It looks like for this great grand battle, but the battle just fizzles because Christ has already won, because we see his clothes are all bloody because they're baptized in his own blood. Like it's this idea, and that battle just fizzles out, and so like it kind of is the same thing with, like, imagine watching this David and Goliath battle. It's like getting ready for you paid your pay-per-view money to watch the big boxing match, right, and all that stuff. And it knocks out one thing. It's like, well, where's the fun in that? Yeah, like that's and like that's, there's all of this drama, but we don't allow to see. To watch it happen would have been a relief for everyone that's paying attention. But that's how there's no glory in battle there. How fast it's taken care of, like that's. And so then let's see, verse 50. Yeah, the end of verse 50. It makes a big deal out of the sword again. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him, but there was no sword in David's hand. Like it makes a big deal out of it. So he grabbed the Philistine sword and cut his head off, and then he carries it around like a purse for a while. I think that there's just head. The head of John the Baptist on a platter type of idea is going on there. So the theology of all of this. And it's, when you read it like this, it's harder to get there. But a way that this is preached a lot is like, God will defeat the Goliaths in your life. That's maybe that too. Yeah. Like, and he might, That's not how this story reads. This story reads that God's champion, who is the whatever it's called, anointed David, God's champion, who in all the ways of God defeats the enemies that seem too great and too scary. Like that is the way you see those lines going through there in Job, when God is taking Job at the end of it through that big journey. He shows him Leviathan, which is the most scary thing you can think of. And God says, look at the most scary thing you can think of, Job. I keep that as a pet for my girls, type of idea. There's no big thing there. So these big scary things, and God in the most God way possible through this effective shepherd, who out of love and devotion for the people that he's around, because he talks about how the threat is this uncircumcised Goliath, the love and devotion of his own people, he's able by the power of God to defeat Goliath, this big imposing thing, for the people who are too scared to be able to act in and of themselves. That's the narrative of the story, and that's that same narrative that's picked up in Jesus and all the salvation figures all throughout Scripture. That we aren't David in this story. We are closer to Saul, but we're actually probably closer to David's brothers and all that are hiding. It's like, why are you even here? You know, and David still, by his actions, Jesus by his actions still saves us all. And I think that you see that theology just be almost rammed down our throat in the story of David and Goliath as we go through there. Yeah. So like it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool. Do we have anything that I missed that anyone want to talk about or anything like that?
I just thought it was interesting after he defeated him that the Philistines fled and they had to go after him.
Oh yeah. They kind of slaughter them along the way.
Yeah.
Well, they also
weren't ready to be enslaved.
Yeah. I mean, that was also the deal, is that they would be like, oh well, and they run. So
I think it's good. If you think back to when you're in Sunday school, and we probably all were.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite stories.
David and Goliath.
Yeah. They had the picture of this huge guy and little David.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I ever got the meaning, like you say, from then. And all this while, hey, we Christians could go beat them.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. And it really, you could see it when you look at it through there. When you read it through the whole story, especially that lens of how Saul is trying to make him more powerful and all those things. Like, it's hard to look at it like that. It's like, oh, this is God's man saving the people. And that's just how God works. And that's what we see in Jesus. And I think it's a cool way of looking at it. It's a very freeing way of looking at it too. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, that's good. That's good. Anything else?
I think it's interesting because if David, in Saul's view, David couldn't do it, couldn't wear his armor and stuff. And if David would have been defeated, they would have all been enslaved.
Yeah.
The Philistines. But Saul didn't pray about it. He didn't do anything.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, if you think you can, bad kind of things.
Expecting him to be crushed.
Yeah.
Not expecting it all.
Yeah.
Even his brothers didn't, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Get out of here. You're supposed to be back taking care of the sheep with Dad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in verse 37, it says, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the lion and claws of the bear will deliver me from the Philistines. And Saul said to David, go and the Lord be with you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he's just saying that because that's what expected, or did he really think the Lord was going to help him?
We could see that the Lord ended up being with him.
Right.
And so
I think Saul really.
I think he could be like, he could have just been like, no matter who I send out there, they're going to be destroyed. So I might as well send out David.
Do you think Saul had a plan B, maybe? Like, well, they'll go kill David. And then we'll see. Like, what were you saying about being servants or slaves?
Yeah, like it's who knows? But there is a glimmer of faith that is going on there. Now he tries to cover it up by giving David all of his armor. Like all that stuff. He still tries to make him look like Saul and the power of Saul.
Yeah.
like that. But there is that, I do agree with you, Carol, that there is that glimmer of faith there that's in there. Yeah.
I think he was talking from a kingly standpoint, that he felt God would be behind them if he said that.
Yeah.
The right thing, perhaps.
So like that's glad. But yeah, no, I think, he's allowing David to go. He's allowing David to go. Lee, did you want to say something? You were about to.
I thought Saul was being facetious because he's telling David, take my armor, which is symbolic of assuming the world or the ways of the world.
Yeah.
And then David says, I don't need the ways of the world. I have God. And Saul, well, then go. God be with you. Like, yeah, go ahead, kid.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think.
Go and good luck.
Yeah, go.
Yeah.
So that's David and Goliath. We'll continue with this next week. So we'll talk about prayers here in a second, but everyone that's watching online, thanks for joining us. So